Have you ever had that sensation where you walked in somewhere and you just were like, whoa, and like all these memories came back flooding into you, right? It's almost like you're reliving all those things from the past. I mean, maybe there was a Wick air freshener that smelled just like the time when you got off the plane in Honolulu, and it just smelled like all the flowers, and just boom, it took you right back to it. Or maybe it was the smell when you visit someone's home and their house smells like mothballs, and you're like, grandma's house. and you're just like, it just takes you to that like happy place, right? Like it's all of that. Or you smell, like this is one for me, like anytime I smell like gunpowder or a fire, like you have some kind of fire, the fire pit kind of fire, it just takes me to all these really happy places, because my parents hold this massive New Year's party every year. They have like 80 people that come to this party, and it's just, I have so many memories. I don't remember a time where we did not have that party. And there's just, I instantly smell fireworks and all that stuff, and it just floods my memory with just laughing hysterically as my friends and I tried our best to bodily harm each other, like with fireworks. But that's, or you could just remember barbecuing, and it reminds you of 4th of July with all of that, maybe at the lake or something like. There's something about the sense of smell and just our other senses that makes things like viscerally powerful, that cause us to kind of relive the situation. And it can also be negative things. It's, do you guys remember Lifesavers Cream Savers? You remember these things? Yeah, right? I don't know if they're still around. They're kind of hard to find now, which is fine to me, because when I was 19, I had one of those in my mouth, and a stomach bug hit me. You know how some of those just all of a sudden they just come on, they're like, oh, I'm sick type of thing? And it hit me instantly over there. What happens now as soon as I put one of those in my mouth? Like that same feeling just comes right back, right? Like it just fills it right back. I have a friend who's a pastor, and he tells a story. His dad died when he was in high school of a severe heart attack, and he was told that his dad had died in one of those small little consultation rooms in the hospital. And he said the first time he had to go into one of those little rooms as a pastor, he almost couldn't do it. Because those little rooms, and I guess they all look identical, at least to him, in every hospital, which they all kind of do. They probably all smell about the same too. And he said his heart rate went up and all that. He says he's better now, but the first couple of times was just almost too much to bear. Or perhaps you sit in an airplane and the lady next to you has the perfume on from someone that maybe a past lover or past, or maybe your mother that used to wear it, and you have to deal with those emotions while you sit on that airplane because there's something about it. Or maybe, just maybe, it's the smell of a charcoal fire, that you've been smelling it for something like 3 days, and all you can think of now is how you've denied the Lord, your rabbi, the teacher, and friend, and that good-for-nothing Judas betrayed him, turned him over to the Romans to crucify him, and you not only did nothing at all, but you denied him 3 times. One of them right next to a roaring charcoal fire. And every time you smell that charcoal, every time you smell it burning, it takes you back to that night with all the feelings of fear, failure, anger, and sadness. This is what I think is what Peter is experiencing. So let's go back to to John chapter 18, which is where first we encounter this charcoal fire. It says, the servant girl at the door said to Peter, "You also are not one of the man's disciples, are you?" And he said, "I'm not. No, that's not me." Now the servants and the officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. This was the first denial. Now, what do you notice that's kind of odd about this? There's a whole lot of fire talk, isn't there? They're very descriptive of this charcoal fire. They're very descriptive of what is going on with this fire. That kind of stands out. And what we see at the end of this is that Peter stinks. He stinks of denial. He stinks of poor friendship. He stinks like charcoal. And I can only imagine that every time just a small breeze comes up onto Peter, that he gets to smell his own stink. The charcoal of denial that was sitting upon him. How much of this reminds you of your own life? There are times that we're having to just deal with our own stink, right? All those times we avoid driving down certain roads. We avoid certain people or avoid anything that reminds us of the hurts that we've experienced. Or maybe it's your divorce that you've had. You, deep down, you know that you've messed up. But so does your spouse, right? But you can't just drive down that one road anymore without seeing signs of him or her. Signs reminding you of where you messed up. Or maybe it was with your kids that you missed a lot of their childhood because you were too busy. You're too busy there. And you were supposed to make it to their Christmas play at school. And they had that one really special line, but you arrived 15 minutes late. And every time you watch the Christmas Carol and you hear, "God bless us, everyone," it takes you back and reminds you of how you weren't there all those times. There are so many things in our walk with Jesus where we mess up, just like Peter did. We mess up all the time, and we have to live in the smell of it all, reminding us of how we've always messed up. This is what Peter's been dealing with. He's been dealing with this for 2 or 3 weeks. Every time he smells charcoal, I can only imagine how it's just bringing back that memory back up to the top, reminding him of how he messed up, how he denied Jesus. The disciple who was supposed to be the greatest, remember they're going to call him Peter? Remember the rock? They were going to call him Peter? The one that he was going to stand up and matter the very most? He messed up at the charcoal fire. And Peter's feeling this. Here's what I love about the Gospels. They have, when you allow them to come into the realm of the real, they have a lot of real stuff in it. Sometimes we treat them as there's this other thing somewhere else. It's a big instruction book. It's not an instruction book. It's about people. It's about people and a God that loves and saves us. And so oftentimes when we realize our mistakes, we oftentimes do what? We like to revert back to a place before in our life, right? Have you ever done that before? Where it's this section of my life didn't work out as planned. Maybe if I start over. Maybe I'll go back over here. Have you ever done that before? Or at least thought about it? That's what the disciples do. Peter, every time he's probably smelling the charcoal, he's I can't handle this anymore. What does he go and do? Exactly what he was doing before. And the disciples go with him. He starts fishing. He starts fishing. Now, he doesn't have any luck while he's fishing, right? They're not able to catch a darn thing all night. They can't catch anything. And then when he gets back to the beach after fishing, there it is, the smell of charcoal fire again. Here, look at it with me. So, this is John chapter 21, verse 9. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. Now, I know what you're saying. You're like, this guy's making a big deal out of this charcoal smell. Like what is he, like, he's just, like, I know what you're saying. You're like, listen, Pastor, I appreciate the mnemonic device. I appreciate the road that you're going down here, but this isn't what it means. Sure. Charcoal fire in the entire Bible is only used twice. And we've read both of them. And they come from the same book. They both come from John. I think John wants us to connect them. Because there are tons of words for fire in Greek. And he uses charcoal fire both times. Let's see what he's trying to tell us. So they knew it was Jesus. You know, they get out on the land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid out on it and bread. You know, before they recognized them, he told them to throw out their nets. Remember that? He told them to throw out their nets, and they brought in a huge catch. And they yelled, "It's the Lord!" And Peter put his clothes back on to go swimming. That seems backwards, but that's all right. He put his clothes back on to go swimming, and the other disciples, like, that's just a weird detail that's thrown in there. It's like, this guy is just fishing naked? Like, all right. So it's going back to the way things used to be, I guess. And so he puts on his clothes and goes to the shore, and the other disciples get to the shore with their and fish and bread are being cooked on the charcoal fire. Or the fish and the bread are being cooked on the same smell of betrayal, of denial and guilt. That same smell, that same denial is now being dealt with. And in the midst of that smell, Jesus asks him, "Do you unconditionally love me, Peter?" All right, so in the English translation, we only have one word for love. Like, that makes things difficult because in the Bible, in Greek, there's 4 words that get translated. They all mean different things that mean love. So I'm going to try to bring those out because Jesus says a different love each time, okay? So he goes, "Peter." Remember, this is around the smell of charcoal all around. He says, "Do you unconditionally love me?" And Peter's like, "Yeah, man, you know I love you. You're my brother. You know that I love you." And Jesus says, "Feed my lambs." And again, Jesus asks, "Do you unconditionally love me?" And Peter's like, "Yeah, you know that I love you like a brother." And Jesus says, "Tend my sheep." And then Jesus says, "Peter, do you love me like a brother?" And I think all of this came to a head for Peter. He's got the stink of denial all around him. Jesus has asked him if he loves him 3 times now. And Peter's just like, "Nah, like I can't handle it." It almost seems like he has a breakdown right here. And it crushes Peter. And Peter yells, "You know that I love you more than anything that I love you. more than anything, everything. And then Jesus says, feed my sheep. Then he goes, Peter, you're going to live a life like I did. You're going to live a life like I did. So follow me. All right. What does all this mean? What's going on here? Because I'm going to tell you something. And I hope that I can communicate this idea. I've set up the story. We talked about charcoal. We talked about denial. We talked about fish. All these things like that. That's every year, usually, sometimes, we'll find out about this year, there's usually an idea that I get that becomes the idea of that year. What we're talking about right now was the idea from 2016. Like that was the idea. The sermon last week, that was the idea from 2015. And then I have this one that I haven't preached yet here, but it's called Jesus Makes Bad Soil into Good, was the idea from 2014. It's weird how they keep happening like that. It's going to be a sad day when it stops. But here's what I think all this means. It's that when Jesus is talking to Peter about how much he loves him and feed my lambs and cooking the fish on that charcoal fire, it's at that and Peter's freaking out at it all and he's like, I can't handle it anymore. It's that very point of Peter's failure by the charcoal fire 3 times that Jesus brings him restoration and forgiveness. And it's at that point that Jesus sends him out. Do you see that? It's at the point of Peter's failure and sinfulness that Jesus restores and forgives him and sends him out. That's completely backwards to how everything, we're like, no. Like, Jesus sends me out from my success. From when I'm being good and righteous, Jesus sends me out from there. But we see in this story that Jesus sends Peter out from the depths of his denial and failure. I think that's true of us because we always run from our failures. But Jesus left the heavens to meet with you in your failures. He's come from the heavens to take on that dirty, nasty smell of your sin as he dies for you and brings you complete redemption as he's raised from the failure of death to life and takes you and me and brings us into his redemption, that made betterness, where he takes you in the smell of your failure and says, I love you like a brother. Or a sister for those that apply. Simply go feed my lambs. Go feed my lambs. You're my guy or my gal. Go feed my lambs. So follow me. I have everything you need. That is the charcoal. But I have a question for you. Do you see it? You see it? But I have a question. And this will end the sermon here with this last thought. I have a question. Where did the fish come from? Where did the fish come from? Because there were fish on the fire already. Because remember, Jesus told them, hey guys, throw your nets on the other side of the boat. And they're hauling that in. And when they got to land with their net, with 153 fish, they got onto land, there were already fish on the fire. There was already fish on the fire. Have you ever thought about where those fish came from? Like, this is a serious question. I think Jesus already had the fish there. Already had the fish there cooking over the coals of Peter's denial and failure. What I'm saying is that Jesus provides the fish for you already. He already has the fish for you, working on them, doing things for them. Because, and the thing that you got to understand about this story is that this is not just like the last story of the Gospels, because it's in John, it's the very end of John. It's not just the last story about this great breakfast of Jesus, Peter, and all the pals. That it's being told for us. It's being told for us. It's not just an encyclopedia entry onto what happened. It's being told for us. It's telling us that even in our failures and sins and shortcomings and hurts, that Jesus is working on them. And in those in the smell of charcoal, Jesus is helping us find healing, and that He gives us all that we need, and we need to just follow Him. Because the fish are already on the fire. The fish are already in the fire. I'm going to make you fishers of men. There's a lot of alliteration going on. You catching it? Jesus is already going before you, preparing your way. You just got to follow Him into it. And He doesn't meet you in your successes. He meets you in the depths of your failure where you don't even want to go. And goes, from here we start. Here we start. And that makes complete sense if we think about it. Do people want, like, Robert Perfect? No, people want the person that it's like, listen, I've been through it too. Let's walk through it together. Right? That's what people want and they need, and that's where Jesus is sending Peter out from. The denier, He's sending him out from there. So I believe this story encourages us in our daily life to think about the charcoal and the fish. And I kind of have a daily prayer. It's not a pretty prayer, but I think it helps us remember this, that every day we could go, Jesus, help me to follow you today and not my desires. That through my failures, that smell of charcoal, that I would see that your fish are already there. That would see that you are already preparing the fish. That we'd see that the fish are already cooking. It's weird language, but it's there. That He would open our eyes to see how Jesus is already working around us, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in where we are. That He's just opening up from our points of weakness, that we could love these people just as Christ has loved us. The fish are already being prepared on top your charcoal fire. And from that point, Jesus says, follow me and feed my lambs.